In 2002, a certain action platformer would be released for the PlayStation 2 that would set a new precedent for platforming video games to come. This was Ratchet and Clank, a game that shied away from the conventional gameplay style of platforming games, which saw players fetching items and saving princesses. Instead, it focused on collecting weapons and gadgets and using those weapons and gadgets in an effective manner. The game was developed by Insomniac Games, makers of the Spyro the Dragon series, between 1998 to 2000. Ratchet and Clank at the time represented a new direction for Insomniac. It marked their first major release on the PlayStation 2, along with marking their first successful game that wasn't related to Spyro the Dragon. Ratchet and Clank for the PlayStation 2 represented an evolution in the platforming video game genre. Up until this game's release in 2002, most platformers followed a pretty typical formula of singular objectives and linear gameplay. Very few platformers from the early 80s to the early 2000s rarely included a focus on collecting an abundance of different weapons and useful gadgets. And even fewer took as many chances in offering a variety of different styles and actions that players would experience. Ratchet & Clank was the game that pushed the boundaries of what players could do in a platforming video game, and for that reason, it will always be one of my favorite video games of all time. Within this retrospective series, I was to shed some light on what made this game so evolutionary and why one can still find enjoyment in playing the original today. This is your big homie Bob of Smoking Fiend Productions. I welcome you to part 1 of the Ratchet & Clank PlayStation 2 series. If you enjoy these deep dives into the history and development behind the classic video games of the 6th console generation, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and please be sure to leave a like.
Look, plumber's crack.
What did you just say?
I said, look, the plumber's back.
All right, wise guy.
Creatures. The city's administration has assured this reporter that every step has been taken to eradicate these nuisances. Darla Gratch, Channel 2 News.
That is the morph array, and that, of course, is Jerry.
The morph array is used in Ratchet and Clank to turn your enemies into chickens.
No, wait, before you do that, just explain to me how it's gonna work.
By 2002, I have grown pretty tired of the older platforming series of my early days as a gamer. One being the Spyro series, which I hate to say fell off with the release of Enter the Dragonfly, one of the most disappointing follow-ups to a beloved game series ever. I can still remember just the sheer boredom this game invoked in my young mind. The game was stale, uninteresting, the graphics were appalling, and didn't look much different from the PS1. And the story, well, it made no sense whatsoever. How could the Spyro series fall so low by the turn of the 21st century? Well, that's because the original makers of the Spyro the Dragon series had long parted ways from their parent company, Universal Interactive Studios, the company that owned all rights to Spyro the Dragon. Insomniac Games, founded in 1994 by CEO Ted Price, throughout 1998 to 2000 produced 3 games in the Spyro series before departing from Universal and entering into a contract with Sony Computer Entertainment of America. Insomniac has a pretty interesting history overall. Their first game, released in 1996 for the PlayStation, was Disruptor, a clone of the popular Doom game, which was regarded as a pretty top-notch FPS by the late 90s. But the game did pretty bad commercially, and didn't sell nearly as much as Insomniac hoped. It was through this failure to capitalize on Disruptor which made the company focus on creating a kid-friendly platformer that would be the Spyro the Dragon series. The 3 games they would produce would be Spyro the Dragon, Spyro the Dragon Ripto's Rage, and Spyro Year of the Dragon. All 3 games would go on to be regarded as excellent platformers for the PlayStation, and would basically make Spyro one of Sony's most iconic mascots. By the end of the development for Year of the Dragon, the Insomniac team was looking to step away from Spyro and start anew with another project. By 2000, they began work on a project called Girl with a Stick, which was later changed to 15 or 15. The game was intended to be an action platformer which drew inspiration from Tomb Raider and Legend of Zelda. While the game's demo did look promising, many of the Insomniac team, including programmers Alex and Brian Hastings, TJ Bodine, and Oliver Wade, expressed their disappointment and disinterest with the project halfway through development. And by the time they showed off a demo to Sony Entertainment, many of the Sony executives, while approving of the game, expressed some disinterest as well. One particular was Connie Booth, who informed Insomniac that they should look into something else that they really wish to stand out on the PlayStation 2. Immediately after this initial meeting, the team began work on Ratchet and Clank. It was clear that Sony nor Insomniac were impressed with Girl with a Stick. So with that, they scrapped the project and began anew. This time focusing on a game that would incorporate space exploration, the collecting of weapons and gadgets, and a storyline which parodied many sci-fi films at the time. There was just one problem. Insomniac lacked an actual game engine, one that would help their latest concept for a video game stand out in terms of graphics and design. The team would build the Art Nouveau D Flash Gordon, a program which simulated a game engine, and with that, Sony approved of the financing for their next project. And with that, Insomniac got into contact with their old office neighbors from Universal, Naughty Dog. For their contacting of Naughty Dog, they would request the use of their game engine for the Jak and Daxter video game that was released in 2001. Side note, Naughty Dog's Charles Azeblis actually designed the final draft of Spyro the Dragon. And just like in 1998, they would assist Insomniac once again in completing a game, this time lending them the use of their game engine and entering into a gentleman's agreement to share any improvements that would be made over time to the engine. Many of us didn't realize it at the time, but the PlayStation 2 was actually incredibly hard to program for. And that had to do with its use of the Emotion engine, which was equipped with several different processors. Whereas the PlayStation was built for the playing of CD-ROM video and audio, the PlayStation 2 was all about those DVD-ROMs, and Insomniac games would face plenty of challenges in rendering DVD quality video and audio. Additionally, they would also deal with the issues related to rendering many of the character models and 3D animations, and at the time Insomniac only had around 7 animators. One of the key challenges would be in designing the characters. Back when they were working on Girl with a Stick, one of the major qualms was how standard and boring the main character and the other characters would look. It was one of the main reasons why Insomniac would focus on creating animal-like characters and sentient robot characters. Luckily enough, Insomniac had some key animators, one of them being David Garutin, the guy who would design Ratchet and Clank. There was also the issue of creating the levels. Anyone who remembers this particular game will know that the levels were elaborately designed and functioned pretty well in motivating the player to explore different environments. Insomniac particularly had to deal with the poor disk burning process and transferring data and code to a disk. The team dealt with multiple instances of the levels being out of memory or somehow someone unknowingly changing the memory card format, thus breaking the entire game. Another issue was found in rendering animations in both cutscenes and game animations. At the same time, the team was still relatively small, and the animation department only consisted of around 7 members in total. And on top of animating all the scenes, they also had to add 2D effects and convert many animations into MPEGSs. The major challenge would be in designing the immersive levels. Anyone who has played this game will know that the levels are absolutely humongous. None were quite that straightforward too, as in their attempts to show off the power of their game engine, they wanted to add in plenty of ambitious gameplay ideas that would involve the players fighting on moving trains, competing in hoverboard races, and also piloting a battleship. Over time, the development team would find better and intuitive ways to fit more gameplay into smaller areas without skimping on the creativity. Using the Naughty Dog engine, Insomniac would make several improvements. One of the key tools Insomniac programmers would use would be the Maya building tool, a software which allowed the team to create polygonal environments and characters, along with providing animations and particle effects. Particularly, Alex Hastings and TJ Bodine would use Maya to create a suite of plugins and tools in order to prevent the game from crashing or lagging. Ratchet and Clank's story centers around the unlikely pair of heroes taking on the powerful Blar Corporation, led by a Chairman Drek. Chairman Drek's plan revolves around creating a new planet for the Blarg race to replace their now polluted planet of Orzon. In achieving this goal, Drek basically wants to harvest the best parts of the planets located in the Salona galaxy and mash them together like Play-Doh. I'm not sure how that would work exactly. But as a result, many of the planets in the Salona galaxy would lose their orbit and spin uncontrollably to the sun and be destroyed. But Drek isn't too worried about that part. This particular plot is fairly reminiscent of the many classic sci-fi films which featured an evil corporation that seems to dominate most aspects of life for regular people. Indeed, it's a classic tale of corporate corruption, manipulation, and exploitation along with the dangers of excessive greed and control. Ratchet and Clank doesn't really provide a lot of backstory related to the Salona galaxy, but upon careful inspection of several of the later planets, we as an audience can piece together some little information and exposition. The Salona galaxy greatly mirrors our own human culture here on Earth. The people within this galaxy are constantly bombarded with advertising and promotions from corporate entities. And people are generally sucked in by the exploits of notable celebs whose faces appear on magazine covers and billboards. All of this serves as a distraction. Furthermore, it's a series of ploys and plots set up by these shady, underhanded crooks looking to squeeze all the money they want out of you. Sorry if it gets so political, but it's hard not to consider how companies like Gadgetron do what they can to encourage consumers to purchase troublesome and defective products. And they seem to be the preferred method of shopping for weapons and gadgets in a similar way that we prefer Amazon for all our shopping and shipping needs. And what about the almost sheer reliance on automated robots to assist in factory production and manufacturing? The manipulative efforts of CEOs wishing to make backroom deals that ultimately affect the lives of millions of people. Do we ourselves not live in a world that Ratchet and Clank's story very much satires? No, probably not. I mean, it's not like we worship celebrities blindly, regardless of their characters. It's not like we have CEOs who are so selfish they rather fire multiple employees rather than cutting their billion-dollar salaries in half. Gameplay in Ratchet and Clank features some pretty typical aspects that you would find in most platformers. However, most of the gameplay does revolve around collecting weapons and gadgets and using them effectively. Many of us who are familiar with those early trailers will remember seeing regular dudes playing around with weapons such as the powerful Devastator rocket launcher, the convenient decoy glove, and the bizarre morph ray cannon. Each one of the weapons comes with a unique and intricate design. Some of the best weapons include the Glove of Doom, a glove that allows you to spawn suicide bots that will run headfirst into any enemy and destroy them from a distance. You also have the Visi Bomb, a bomb launcher where you control the direction of the bomb through the use of a camera. The perfect weapon for floating enemies and enemies at a far distance. Some of the more bizarre weapons include the Morph Ray Cannon, a weapon that can transform any enemy into a chicken, along with the Taunt Gun, which triggers enemies to come closer to you. Weapons such as these are better combined with weapons such as the Suck It Cannon, which allows you to suck up small enemies or chickens and use them as ammo. You also have the Mine Glove, which if you use it with the Taunt Gun will force enemies to step closer to mines along with activating mines to move towards the enemy and set off. And some more of my favorites include the reliable Blaster Gun, the convenient Decoy Glove, and of course there's the Omni Wrench itself. Every weapon with the exception of the Suck It Cannon and a few others are purchased through the many Gadgetron vending machines found across the galaxy. At these vending machines you can buy new weapons along with ammunition. The further you get through the game, the more money you will need to pay to acquire new weapons. Now technically you don't have to buy any weapons or ammo from the vending machine, as not one is entirely needed to complete a level. But at the same time, if you don't have those more powerful weapons like the Devastator, you will have a difficult time within the later parts of the game. If you were planning to unlock every weapon during your first playthrough, well, you'll need to grind levels for both consistently, as Insomniac basically made it impossible for someone to gain each weapon through just one playthrough. While weapons can be purchased at vending machines, the same cannot be said about the gadgets. Another key component of Ratchet and Clank was found in collecting and effectively using gadgets to advance the player to certain sections of the map. What was really interesting here was the way that Insomniac used the gadget segments of the game to incorporate designs that changed up the gameplay in a few ways. For instance, the grind rail segments found on several planets. Upon acquiring the grind boost, the player can control Ratchet as he grinds for his life on the dangerous obstacle courses, which could feature unfinished sections and hovering bombs. You also had the space helmet, which allowed the player to control a spaceship and fight in actual space battles. While acquiring weapons isn't necessary to advance the game, finding new gadgets is very much necessary to advance. And the thing is that these gadgets, upon being needed, aren't always available. In some cases, you will need to head off to a new planet or head back to an old planet to acquire a gadget. Yeah, to a certain extent this game does include some backtracking at its finest, but it's done in a very proactive manner here, as it does force the player to return back to planets and explore locations that weren't immediately available. For me, this aspect generally appealed to my sense of exploration and taking in the environment around me. With a lot of platforming games, players were usually tied to a few movesets and options to how they go around clearing levels. But Ratchet and Clank was the first platformers of the new console generation that really offered the player a sense of variety. Each of the weapons and gadgets can be equipped through the convenient quick selection menu that can be customized in the start screen. While playing, you can use the quick selection menu by holding down the triangle button and selecting whatever you need. At the time, there were a few qualms that I had with the gameplay, particularly trying to switch your weapon in the middle of being surrounded by enemies could result in the player losing health. To remedy this problem for future games, the gameplay would be paused in order to provide the player with more time to decide upon what weapon or gadget they need. Another problem I had was using the lock-on target, which at times could be clumsy for a few projectile weapons. To remedy this in future games, Insomniac would include a strafing mechanic that would allow the player to move more easily and shoot at the same time while more effectively dodging enemy fire. Now that isn't to say you couldn't dodge in this game, as dodging works by holding down R1 and pressing X and moving Ratchet in whatever direction you wish him to move in. This can be convenient in avoiding enemy fire, but it's not always the most effective. So that's the general gameplay as it relates to weapons. However, I didn't get touch on the melee component of the game, which basically revolves around using Ratchet's huge Omni wrench. With the wrench, the player can perform a light attack with square, a double light attack by hitting square twice, and additionally the player can use a heavy attack by pressing X to jump and hitting square. The wrench itself can act as both a weapon, projectile, and tool. For instance, while holding down R1 and hitting square, this will allow the player to throw the wrench like a boomerang into an enemy and have it return to them. And like the other weapons, the wrench can be thrown in first person by holding down L1. Certain parts of the map will require the player to use Ratchet's wrench to turn screws. This is used once more to access different parts of the map, thus also making it an effective gadget as well. Perhaps the most important gadget you'll have access to is of course Ratchet's sidekick, Clank, the robot. Clank not only acts as Ratchet's storage device, but also is used to access different areas of the map through his upgrades. These upgrades include the Helipad, Thruster Pack, and Hydro Pack. Each of Clank's upgrades are fairly useful in allowing you to glide or jump from far distances, along with allowing you to travel underwater. Many of the gadgets that you will find come directly from Gadgetron, which if you didn't know, they are the main competitors of the Blarg Corporation in offering weapons and gadgets across the entire galaxy. This company plays a much larger role in the game's story other than just being a vendor with high-end weapons and gadgets. After all these years of playing the original Ratchet and Clank, I've always kind of theorized that the Blarg were more than just out to get a new planet, when in fact they also wanted to corner the market on weapons and gadgets. And in turn, Gadgetron is always creating weapons and gadgets as a way of undermining and working against the Blarg. Could it not be more than a coincidence that each gadget you find in some way is used against Blarg technology? Take the Hologuise for instance, a device that allows you to infiltrate a Blarg-controlled sentry bot factory. Or how about the Infiltrator, a device that allows you to hack Blarg-controlled doors. In so many single-player games, there just isn't a whole lot of focus on these secondary characters and how they exist within the same world as the protagonists. But Ratchet and Clank truly incorporated a focus on how the inhabitants of the Salona Galaxy were dealing with the Blarg invasion. The game does this through a number of ways, particularly in talking to the inhabitants and completing tasks for gadgets. It also does this through the various infobots that you find along the way. These infobots play various TV commercials, news reports, and updates on the Blarg's new planet. The main focus might be on collecting weapons and gadgets, but there's also a small focus on collecting information, such as on the whereabouts of different gadgets and Captain Quark. You also get a further view into how the Blarg invasion is directly affecting inhabitants of different planets. These cutscenes are fairly reminiscent of the ones featured in Spyro's Ripto's Rage and Year of the Dragon. Particularly in Spyro, players would be shown small cutscenes that conveyed the problems that the inhabitants of the world were experiencing. In each of these cutscenes, they acted as a sort of individual story that drew players in. Ratchet and Clank's cutscenes sort of incorporate a similar narrative focus, one that allows the player to take in some critical information regarding a planet, at the same time learning about the inhabitants. Another way that Insomniac incorporated a focus on how the inhabitants were dealing with the huge threat of the Blarg invasion is through the designs of various levels. You take the planet of Endora for instance, a planet where upon first arriving you see various robots controlled by Drek harvesting trees and stealing other natural resources. Or how about the planet of Pitaru, the home of the Jawa resort? On this planet you deal with the various mutated creatures that are the result of the Blarg dumping toxic waste into the ecosystem. The best examples however should be noted as the planets of Olantis and Orxon. Atlantis is a planet that was the most impacted by far from the Blarg invasion, as the entire layout of the planet is in complete disarray. And then you have Orxon, the planet that is so radiated Ratchet cannot walk around without the O2 mask. This was the same planet that got so polluted that the Blarg had to abandon it and seek a new one. There's much to enjoy about the Ratchet and Clank story, plus the world which the game is set in. But one can also appreciate the brilliant writing and characters of the game as well.
Aha! That ventilation shaft leads to the turret platform. Soldier, find a way to use that shaft to infiltrate the compound undetected.
Sweet. I bet Captain Quark uses stuff like this all the time.
Ha! Real men can wing without silly toys like that.
Has this ever happened to you? Hi, I'm Captain Quark, and believe me, there's nothing worse than staring down a Blargian snagglebeast from the inside and knowing your equipment isn't functioning properly.
This game's writing is filled with a good sense of humor and snarkiness, along with a few adult jokes as well. While it does incorporate some darker themes such as invasions and hostile takeovers, the game never takes itself too seriously. And for that reason, there are plenty of hidden jokes found in the game that will raise your eyebrow. As far as programming is concerned, one can still find the occasional bug or two, but this game pulls off some tremendous feats. Take for instance the lack of a single loading screen through the game. Of course the game is still loading, but this is masked by the short cutscenes showing Ratchet and Clank traveling through the Salona Galaxy aboard their ship, very much similar to the flying segments in Spyro the Dragon. You know, during the early stages of Ratchet and Clank's development, at no time did Sony ever threaten to break their contract with Insomniac. Even after the failure of Girl with a Stick, Sony was still willing to give Insomniac time and the resources to make a better and more quality video game. And that really shows how important that developer and publisher relationship can be in creating a classic game that would be well regarded for decades to come. Thanks for watching y'all, and make sure you let me know what you think about the original Ratchet and Clank in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and hit that subscription button. Once again, thanks for watching. Peace out.
So, you are an inventor.
Gadget engineer. I create revolutionary devices for Executive Chairman Drek.
And if you don't like it, you can take your whiny, sniveling, snot-nosed populations, form a line behind me, and kiss my... We're still on? Well, turn it off, you idiot!